1 minute ago, Courtney Force broke years of silence and made a raw, emotional statement about her father, John Force. And what she revealed changes everything we thought we knew about life inside the Force dynasty. Her honesty exposes the pressure, the sacrifice, and the hidden cost of growing up under a racing legend's shadow, and why she could no longer carry it. It happened during what was supposed to be a lighthearted interview. One of those rare appearances Courtney Force makes now that she's stepped out of the racing spotlight. But somewhere between questions about life after the track and her new routines, the interviewer asked about her father. And something in Courtney shifted. Her smile faded. Her posture changed. She took a long breath, the kind that signals a truth someone has carried far too long. Then she said the sentence that made the racing world stop. People see the legend, but they don't understand what it's like to grow up under the weight of that legend. The room fell silent. The interviewer froze, and fans watching the live stream watched Courtney Force open up in a way she never had. Not in press conferences, not in documentaries, not even in the emotional interviews after her retirement. Courtney explained that this wasn't about criticizing her father. It wasn't anger, resentment, or blame. It was honesty. A kind of honesty she avoided for years because she didn't want to disappoint the man whose approval meant everything. She admitted she had spent most of her life performing strength, balancing expectations she never dared to question, while fans saw victories, trophies, records, and iconic moments shared with John Force. She felt the invisible pressure no one talked about. She describes it as loving someone so much that you're terrified of letting them down every single day. Her voice trembled as she added, "I don't think people realize how heavy it is to carry a name that already changed the sport." That was the moment everyone realized Courtney wasn't just making a statement. She was finally telling the truth about what it meant to be John Force's daughter, and why the world never understood the cost behind the legacy. When Courtney begins talking about her childhood, her voice softens, not in nostalgia, but in recognition of how early the pressure began. She explains that most kids grow up with sports, school, and birthday parties. Her childhood, it smelled like nitro. It sounded like engines shaking the earth. It moved at 330 miles per hour. She remembers being backstage at races before she even understood what racing meant. Photographers snapping pictures, fans asking for autographs, her father pacing with the intensity of a man fighting for oxygen. John Force was already a giant in the sport when Courtney was still learning how to spell her name. And that, she admits, shaped everything. From the outside, she says, it looked like magic, but inside, it was a lot to carry at a young age. Courtney reveals that growing up in the Force family wasn't about being pushed. It was about being surrounded by expectation. Teachers, neighbors, even strangers assumed she would follow her father, echo his personality, inherit his greatness. Every compliment had a shadow. You'll be just like your dad someday. But Courtney wasn't built like her father. She was quieter, more analytical, more emotionally aware. She didn't thrive on chaos the way John did. She didn't crave the spotlight. She learned to adapt to it because she had no choice. As a kid, I just wanted to make him proud, she admits. I didn't realize how early I started shaping myself around that. She says it took years to understand the difference between wanting to succeed and needing to succeed because the world expected nothing less. To fans, her father was a superhero. To Courtney, he was both that, and the impossible shoes she was expected to fill. When Courtney transitioned from the sidelines to the driver's seat, she didn't do it with confidence. She did it with fear. Fear that the world already had its mind made up about her. Fear that people believed she got the opportunity because of her last name. Fear that every mistake would be broadcast louder because the Force family didn't produce average. The first time I sat in the car, she says, I heard the critics louder than the engine. She recalls reading comments online, hearing whispers in the pits, picking up on crew members' skepticism. She understood why. They didn't know her yet. They only knew her father. And she realized quickly that earning respect in the NHRA world would take more than talent. It would take resilience, thick skin, work ethic beyond what anyone expected from a rookie. Courtney began staying late, studying data, asking questions, building her own voice in an environment dominated by veteran crew chiefs and the presence of her father's legacy. She remembers walking into meetings where everyone looked at her as John's daughter first and a driver second. I had to fight for people to see me, she says, not the last name, not the brand, me. But even as she earned victories, broke records, and proved her skill, the pressure didn't fade. Every win came with the unspoken question, is she becoming as good as John? Better? Or falling short? Courtney reveals she never allowed herself to enjoy early success because she was always bracing for criticism. Every minor mistake felt catastrophic. Every mechanical failure felt personal. No matter how hard I worked, she admits, I felt like I was always trying to escape a shadow I never asked to stand in. This constant tension between achievement and expectation eventually became the primary fracture that would shape her entire racing career. Courtney describes the breaking point not as a dramatic explosion, but as a slow, quiet realization built from years of internal pressure. It was during a post-race press conference. She had just performed exceptionally, one of her best weekends. The crowd cheered, cameras flashed, her crew celebrated. But then a reporter asked the one question she'd heard 1,000 times. Do you think you'll ever be as great as your dad? Courtney remembers freezing. Not because she didn't know the answer, but because she realized she was exhausted from having to answer it at all. That was the moment, she says. The moment I realized the world wasn't watching me. They were watching the possibility of the next John Force. She could feel her identity slipping into something she didn't control. A narrative built around comparisons she never invited. Even in victory, the shadow was there. Even in success, she felt small. It hit her all at once. No matter how hard she worked, no matter how much she achieved, the measuring stick would always be her father. And no one, not even John, could undo that. She remembers walking out of the conference with a tight chest, thinking, this isn't joy anymore. This is survival. Courtney admits she didn't tell anyone how much that moment affected her. Not her sisters, not her crew, not even her father. She went home, sat alone, and realized she was living her life through someone else's expectations. That was when I understood, she says. I wasn't chasing my dream anymore. I was living his. The emotional weight of that truth reshaped her entire perspective and ultimately led to the most difficult decision of her life. Stepping away. Courtney's tone shifts here. More fragile, more honest than fans have ever heard her. She admits she spent years pretending everything was fine, even when the emotional weight of the Force legacy became unbearable. To fans, she was confident, poised, fearless. But behind closed doors, the truth was completely different. There were nights I couldn't sleep, she says quietly. Not because I was scared of racing, but because I was scared of disappointing my dad. She describes a version of pressure most people never experience. The pressure of representing not just yourself, but an entire dynasty built on decades of sacrifice and success. Every time she put on her fire suit, she felt like she was putting on armor to protect her family name. Even small mistakes, slipping the clutch, reacting late, drifting on a run, felt catastrophic because she knew people weren't just judging Courtney Force the driver. They were judging John Force's daughter. She describes moments where she cried alone in hotel rooms after tough weekends, replaying her mistakes over and over again. She never told anyone, not her father, not her sisters, not her crew. "I didn't want to seem weak," she explains. "In our world, strength isn't suggested, it's expected." She also admits something she's never said publicly. Sometimes she resented how effortlessly her father handled pressure. While she felt crushed under expectations, John thrived under them. He fed off the chaos, used it as motivation, and transformed pressure into performance. Courtney couldn't do that. Not consistently, not without emotional cost. "I thought something was wrong with me," she says. "I thought, if I'm not built like him, maybe I don't belong here." Fans never saw that part. They saw the victories, the smiles, the trophy photos, but they never saw the quiet battles Courtney fought within herself. Courtney says her departure from racing wasn't a sudden decision. It was a slow unraveling of a dream that had become too heavy to carry. For years, she powered through doubt, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. She kept telling herself she just needed one more run, one more win, one more breakthrough. And then the pressure would ease. "It never eased," she says. "I got louder." Her breaking point came during a routine test session. Nothing dramatic happened. No crash, no argument. But Courtney remembers climbing out of the car after a run, taking off her helmet, and realizing she felt nothing. No excitement, no adrenaline, no joy, just emptiness. "That scared me more than any run I'd ever made," she admits. She stepped away from the car, looked at her crew, people she loved, and knew she couldn't keep pretending. Her mind was exhausted, her heart was tired, her identity had been swallowed by expectations she could no longer meet. Telling her father was the hardest part. When she sat down with John, he initially didn't understand. Racing was his oxygen, his purpose, his life. He didn't know how to comprehend a world where his daughter didn't want to race anymore. But as Courtney explained her emotional struggle, her fear of letting him down, and the toll the legacy had taken on her mental health, something shifted. It wasn't anger, she recalls. It was heartbreak. She says John realized, maybe for the first time, that the pressure he survived wasn't something everyone could or should absorb. Courtney didn't quit racing. She saved herself from losing who she was. And in doing so, she began healing her relationship with the sport and with her father. Courtney says the conversation that followed her retirement announcement is one she will never forget. It wasn't public. There were no cameras, no statements, no PR scripts. Just a father and daughter, finally speaking honestly after years of emotional distance created by the demands of racing. John Force didn't raise his voice. He didn't try to convince her to stay. He didn't put pressure on her to reconsider. Instead, he cried. Courtney reveals for the first time that her father apologized. He apologized for the pressure he never meant to put on her, for the expectations he didn't realize she was carrying, for building a legacy so big that it accidentally cast shadows over the people he loved the most. "He told me he was proud of me," she says, tears forming, not as a driver, as his daughter. This was the moment everything changed. For the first time, Courtney felt like John saw her, not the potential champion he hoped she'd become, not the extension of his legacy, not the symbol of Force dominance, just his child, needing support instead of expectations. "I realized then that his legacy wasn't supposed to be a burden," she says. "It was just his way of loving the sport, and us." Stepping away didn't disappoint John. It opened a door to a deeper relationship they never had time to build during the racing years. Courtney smiles softly as she recalls that moment. "That's when I knew I had made the right choice." Courtney explains that stepping away from racing didn't just change her career. It fundamentally changed her relationship with her father. For the first time in her life, She wasn't being evaluated through the lens of performance, speed, statistics, or comparisons. She wasn't John Force's daughter, the driver. She was simply Courtney. And that shift, she says, was the beginning of healing. Racing kept us close, she admits, but it also kept us confined. Their conversations had always revolved around the sport, strategy, performance, sponsor obligations, the next event. Every interaction was tied to results, even when love was the foundation beneath everything. But after she stepped away, something unexpected happened. Silence. Not the awkward kind, but the kind where two people realize they don't fully know each other outside the world that defined them. Courtney says her father struggled at first. He didn't know how to talk to her without talking about racing. But slowly he began asking different questions. How are you sleeping? What are you enjoying these days? What do you want your life to look like? For the first time, John wasn't coaching her. He was listening. She remembers a moment that changed everything. They were sitting on the porch of the shop, just talking about life after racing, when John said, "I'm proud of you for knowing when to stop. I never did." Courtney realized then that stepping away didn't weaken their bond. It strengthened it. It gave them room to be father and daughter instead of mentor and protege. It gave John a chance to see her beyond the helmet. And it gave Courtney the space to finally understand her father not as a legend, but as a human being who had been shaped by the same pressures he passed down unknowingly. Leaving racing didn't distance us, she says softly. It brought us together in a way the sport never allowed. Courtney takes a deep breath as she shifts her attention from personal memories to the broader message she hopes fans can understand. She addresses the misconceptions surrounding legacy. How people assume that inheriting greatness is a gift, when in reality, it can feel like a responsibility too heavy to carry. People think carrying a famous name gives you confidence, she says. Sometimes it does the opposite. She explains that no one, not fans, not analysts, not even well-meaning crew members, truly understands the internal battle that comes with being compared to a racing icon. Every comment like, "You're just like your dad," or "Are you going to beat his records?" may be intended as encouragement. But to her, it always felt like a test she never asked to take. Courtney emphasizes that she is proud of her father and proud to be a force. But she wants fans to recognize that identity is something each person must find for themselves. She reveals that stepping away from racing wasn't about quitting. It was about reclaiming her own life, her own voice, her own sense of who she was outside of the sport. "I didn't retire because I was weak," she says. "I retired because I was brave enough to choose myself." She speaks directly to fans who feel trapped by expectations, whether from family, career, or society. She encourages them to recognize that stepping off a certain path doesn't mean failure. Sometimes it's the beginning of truly understanding who you are. Her closing words in this section resonate deeply. Legacy is not a burden unless you let it be one. And a name, even a great one, doesn't define your worth. The interviewer asks Courtney one final question. What do you want people to understand about your father now that you've spoken your truth? She pauses, considering her words carefully, not wanting them to be misinterpreted. Then she delivers the statement that reshapes the entire narrative. "My father isn't the reason I left racing. He's the reason I survived it." She explains that while the pressure of being a force was immense, it was never about John demanding perfection. It was about the emotional intensity he carried and passed on, because racing was all he knew for most of his life. She reveals that the man fans see as a force of nature is also vulnerable, compassionate, and deeply human behind closed doors. "People forget he came from nothing," she says. "Every win, every title, every record came from fear and fire and survival. Sometimes that kind of life builds shadows without meaning to." Courtney admits she once saw his legacy as something she had to live up to. Now she sees it as something he built out of love, determination, and sacrifice. Something she can respect without needing to replicate. She adds that John supported her decision more deeply than fans ever knew. He checked on her constantly. He reassured her she made the right choice. He told her she didn't need to define herself by the sport he lived in. In closing, she offers a message that reframes everything. Racing didn't break us, expectations did, but honesty healed us. With that final, emotional truth, Courtney Force doesn't diminish her father's legend. She humanizes it. And in doing so, she finally steps out of the shadow and into her own light.